That's fine, but what I just said was true. That's
It
what
is
happened.
not true.
No, what you did was true. You went around what the board agreed to. We passed something at our last meeting based on a set of assumptions, which you were ignoring and doing on your own. The board did not authorize. The board authorized removal of the nomination from the ISAC agenda. That's what we voted on. That's what was passed at the last meeting. If there was another procedure in play, then it should have been brought to the board's attention. So we could approve the vote.
The board requested the consideration that the item be removed from the agenda. That was the vote from the November meeting.
Yes. So I'm confused. What
are you saying he's done, Christie?
Yeah.
I just explained it. He talked to Mr. Wheeler, which he said at the meeting last week, and he also wrote a letter requesting that ISAC withdraw, that IHPA
After our board
put it
meeting.
on the agenda. No, before your board meeting. Because your statement said it, and your letter of the 7th said it.
Before the December board meeting, but after the board met in November. Is that what you're arguing, Christie? That we met as a board
We
in
met
November?
as a board November 10th.
Yes.
5 days before that and 3 days before that, Tolbert was already working to use a different procedure than what the board voted upon. And at the November 10th board meeting, you requested whether it's talking about ISAC or IHPA. You know what we voted on, and you know that's what was approved, and that's what was done.
I'm sorry.
I don't know what you're talking
Christie,
about.
you
I really
voted as a
don't.
board in November?
We took no action with the state until it was approved by the board.
No, that's not right.
That's not true. You have a letter dated November 7th. That was 3 days before our November board meeting. A letter November 7th from you to Mr. Wheeler asking him to not forward the nomination to ISAC. We already, in September,
You conveyed the referendum results to
Oh,
Mr.
we sent in the
Wheeler.
referendum results.
and we asked him not to forward the nomination
Yes.
to ISAC. But in September, the board voted to discuss whether or not we were going to ask for withdrawal from the agenda at our November meeting. And so you sent the letter 3 days before the board ever met to discuss it.
You also stated that you knew on November 5th it might not be on the agenda, and you didn't bring that to the board's attention on November 10th. Which would have totally changed the vote, and we could have addressed the situation if we had.
That was a whole emergency meeting issue.
By the way, the reason the meeting was, the special emergency meeting was called because I had a quorum.
But you,
I had a quorum. We called to have a quorum.
Right, but the agenda was to discuss an ordinance, which was never discussed from what I can gather.
Because we didn't have a quorum.
and you knew
And why was
24
there a
hours,
meeting?
you knew 24 hours, well, more than 24 hours before that meeting, you didn't have a
No, I
quorum.
didn't.
You didn't know 24 hours in advance that there was no quorum? Well, I told you Tuesday, I could not be there.
You couldn't, and Tom was in Colorado. You know,
In
I had
fact,
a
you're-
quorum, we called a special meeting, and then we didn't have a quorum, so we didn't have a meeting.
So you found out at the time of the meeting there was no quorum?
So I found out earlier in the day, in a conversation with Brad, and then after the meeting, the lack of quorum, Jim called me, and I told him at that time we didn't have a quorum and didn't have a meeting.
Well, an email went around the community that morning saying where everybody was and who was coming and who wasn't. So
That's right. The email said that as of Thursday night, there was no quorum.
What email?
An email from Kelly Cobor to people encouraging them to come to the meeting, saying that as of Thursday night, there was no quorum, and said exactly which trustees were going to be at the meeting, and said that the other trustees should rearrange their schedules to be at this meeting.
Well, that had nothing to do with me. I have nothing to do, I have no conversations about that.
Well, Brad, when did you know there was no quorum?
I received a call from Jim confirming that his attendance, and then Thursday afternoon or late in the day we had a meeting with Mr. Perrin, and that's when we talked about his inability because of schedule change.
I called you.
You called and left a message, and then we talked about it again late in the day, and then Friday morning President Chisholm and I were in my office, and he reached out to at least 2 people that he knew were in the area, not Trustee Terrell and not Trustee Lair because they were out of the state, to Trustee Hughes and Trustee Basu to see if there was a chance there would be a quorum available given whoever's schedule.
So you didn't tell Tolbert until Friday morning that there was no quorum?
Tolbert knew when Jim and I talked on Thursday afternoon.
Okay, so Thursday.
And then
Tolbert-
Friday morning, Tolbert called both your phone and left a message in Jim's phone. At least that's the
had-
only conversation I was aware of in my office.
All right,
He
so-
reached out to both you.
So in essence, Tolbert, you knew Thursday afternoon, there was no quorum. I had told you Tuesday, there was no way I could be at a Friday afternoon or evening meeting. So I was surprised you called Friday and asked if I could be there for 5 minutes
Well-
when I had told you I could not. So you knew there was no quorum, and yet you held the meeting, and then you made a statement as if chastising the trustees for not being there, which I find very inappropriate. Questioning our integrity, questioning our commitment to our roles as trustees, to our service to the community, when you knew the reasons we were not there. I also find disturbing your statement that you're disappointed that the trustees did not make time for a meeting. Again, when you called each of us, I know I at least told you why I couldn't be there, and I've learned from other trustees, they've also told you why they could not be there. You gave us one date for a meeting, a Friday afternoon. You called us 3 days in advance for that meeting, and you're disappointed that we either didn't cancel a meeting, come in from out of town, or rearrange or break prior commitments for a Friday afternoon meeting. I don't think that's fair to the trustees, and I think it was not appropriate for you to make that statement at the meeting.
When I called the emergency meeting, I had a quorum.
And you knew 24 hours before the meeting there was no quorum, and you continued with the meeting.
Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know if I could pick up one trustee, that I could have a quorum.
But Trustee Hughes had just called and said he could not be there
I
because
understand.
of the meeting. I had told you I could not be there, so I don't know who you expected to be there.
Well, I called that because I didn't know, and so I kept it open in case we could. It's that simple.
And you knew
Right.
by the time of the
Yes.
meeting.
I'm sorry, just to make a comment though, I think this is sort of a silly conversation in terms of talking about whether a special meeting could or couldn't be held and when and why, because we actually asked for this special meeting to be scheduled and on the agenda for November 5th, back in August.
I
And in
understand.
August, we tried to schedule this so that we wouldn't be in this predicament,
Yep.
and if we were going to
I
hold that
understand.
special meeting in August, or in November, on November 5th, we would still have control of the ISAC agenda.
Yep.
And it would never have gone downstate because we would have had results. And we asked at that time for the board to consider to have a special meeting on the 5th so that in order for us to be able to evaluate the results of the election, and if it was not clear, we could continue to study it, but if it was clear, as this result happens to be, we could take action appropriately. And instead, the board at the time decided, on a 4-2 vote, decided not to do so,
Yes.
because they assured the public and the rest of the board that if the board voted against it at any time, ISAC would absolutely listen. So I find it very hard to balance this now, that now there's a disagreement about the purpose for a special meeting and not following through on ISAC or not wanting us to follow through on something that was promised.
And Katie, that's exactly what I meant by an end run. The board did vote. Board voted in September for the procedure that we would follow. We had a timeline that we had been following since July of the nomination process and the withdrawal process. And so we were aware of every vote that we took of what it meant. The procedure for withdrawal was that once the agenda for ISAC was set, that's the council that reviews the nomination. Once that agenda is set, a request for withdrawal is considered by the council at their meeting. You're right, you wanted much earlier you wanted to have a meeting the day after the referendum
So it would never
to
go on the
consider
agenda again?
withdrawing it, so it would never go on the agenda. The other trustees said that we believed that the state would honor our request, that the council would honor our request. We had been told by our consultant that if the applicant requests withdrawal, the council will honor that. Our consultant is the former deputy director of IHPA, the former National Register coordinator for IHPA. There is no precedent, there is no data which would indicate the council would honor our request.